The kitchens of Veyrath Castle smelled of bread and smoke long before the sun rose over the eastern hills. Every morning, a young woman named Mira woke before the bells, tied her hair beneath a plain grey cap, and slipped into the crowded warmth of the servants' hall. She moved quietly among the other workers, carrying trays, scrubbing pots, and folding linens with practiced hands. No one looked at her twice. That was exactly what she wanted. 8 months earlier, she had not been Mira at all. She had been Lyra Sinclair, daughter of a respected beta from a neighboring pack, promised in marriage to a man she had never met. His name was known across every territory in the region, Draven Ashcroft, the Alpha King of Veyrath. People spoke of him in careful whispers. They said he had crushed 3 rival packs before his 25th birthday. They said his temper was as cold as winter stone, and that anyone who crossed him disappeared from memory. Lyra had grown up hearing these stories, told again and again by elders who wanted to frighten young pups into obedience. By the time she stood outside the great hall on the night of her binding ceremony, wearing a gown stitched with silver thread, she was not thinking about duty or alliance. She was thinking about escape. So she ran. She cut her long black hair short with a kitchen knife, traded her silk gown for a servant's plain dress left drying on a fence, and walked straight through the castle gates before anyone thought to stop a girl who looked like she belonged there. By morning, the kingdom was searching for a runaway bride. By nightfall, that same runaway bride was scrubbing dishes in the very castle she had fled, hidden in plain sight among 100 other servants who never asked her name twice. It should not have worked. She told herself that many times in those first frightened weeks. But no one imagines that the missing bride of the Alpha King would choose to hide inside his own home. The safest place to disappear, she had learned, was somewhere no one thought to look. Over time, fear softened into something like routine. Mira learned the names of the head cook and the laundry mistress. She learned which hallways to avoid during the king's private hours, and which corners were safe for a few minutes of rest. She told herself this quiet, unremarkable life was enough. She did not need grand halls or crowns. She needed only to breathe without dread, and for 8 months she had done exactly that. What she did not know, and could not have known, was that the bond between mates does not simply fade because 2 people are kept apart. Draven Ashcroft had felt it the moment her scent had reached him for the first time, carried on the wind before their binding ceremony had even begun. It was faint but unmistakable, warm and clean, like rain on cedar wood. He had stood in his private chambers that evening, waiting for his bride to be brought before him, feeling something inside his chest settle into place for the first time in his life. Then, before he had even seen her face, she was gone. For weeks afterward, his advisors saw only a king who had grown colder and harder than before. They assumed his anger came from pride, from the insult of being abandoned before his own people. They did not understand that pride was the smallest part of what he felt. The bond that had opened inside him on that single night had gone silent, like a door slamming shut in an empty house, and no war, no victory, no conquest since had been able to fill that silence. He ordered his men to search every territory for the missing bride. He told himself it was for the sake of the alliance between their 2 packs. Some nights, alone in his study long after the castle had gone quiet, he caught the faintest thread of her scent drifting through the halls, and told himself it was only his own longing playing tricks on his senses. A king could not chase ghosts. He had a kingdom to run. The morning that changed everything began like any other. The servant usually assigned to deliver the king's breakfast tray had fallen ill overnight, and the head cook, flustered and short on time, thrust the tray into Mira's hands without a second thought. "Quickly now," she said. "Straight to his study, and don't linger." Mira's stomach turned to ice, but there was no time to argue. She had spent 8 months avoiding this exact hallway during these exact hours. Now she walked toward it, tray balanced carefully, telling herself it would take only a moment. Set the tray down, turn, leave. She had done harder things than this. The king's study was large and lined with tall windows that let in the pale gold light of early morning. Draven sat behind his desk, reading through reports left from the night before, his dark hair still damp from washing, his expression unreadable. He did not look up as the door opened, Servants came and went from this room constantly. There was no reason to notice one more. Mira crossed the room quickly, set the tray down beside his papers, and turned to leave before he could so much as glance at her. But as she turned, a draft slipped through the window and caught the edge of her collar, lifting it just slightly, just long enough, and with it came her scent, carried across the room the way it had been carried to him once before, on the night everything had gone wrong. Draven's head snapped up. For one frozen heartbeat, neither of them moved. Mira stood halfway to the door, her hand still outstretched from setting down the tray, her cap slightly crooked from the morning's rush. Draven stood slowly from his chair, his eyes fixed on her face, with an intensity that made the air in the room feel suddenly thin. She knew, in that instant, that 8 months of careful hiding had ended in the space of a single breath. "Wait," he said. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of command that no servant could ignore, even one who was not truly a servant at all. Mira's hand found the door handle. Every instinct told her to run, the same way she had run 8 months ago, but something in his voice was different from the cold, distant king the stories had described. It was not anger, it was disbelief, and beneath that, something that sounded almost like relief. She turned back slowly, and for the first time in 8 months, she let him see her face clearly, without the cap pulled low or her eyes cast down. Draven crossed the room in a few long strides, stopping only when he stood close enough to see the faint scar above her eyebrow, a small detail from her betrothal portrait that he had once studied for hours before burning the painting in a fit of anger and grief. There was no mistaking her now. The sharper cheekbones and short-cropped hair could not hide what the Bond already knew. "Lyra," he said quietly. It was the first time her true name had been spoken aloud in this castle in 8 months. She flinched at the sound of it, half expecting shouted orders, half expecting guards to appear at the door. Instead, Draven simply stood there, studying her as though trying to memorize a face he had feared he would never see again. "I am not going to hurt you," he said, reading the fear plain on her face. "I only want to understand. Why did you run before you even gave me the chance to be more than a story you were told to fear?" The question caught her off guard. She had prepared herself for anger, for punishment, even for the possibility of being thrown into a cell for her deception. She had not prepared for a question asked so plainly, so honestly, as though he genuinely wanted to know. "Because everyone told me who you were before I ever met you," she said finally, her voice steadier than she expected. "They said you destroyed 3 packs before you were even a grown man. They said you were cruel and cold, and that anyone bound to you would live in fear for the rest of their life. I was 17 when they first told me those stories. By the time I stood outside the hall on our binding night, I was not thinking of you as a person. I was thinking of you as the ending of every warning I had ever heard." Draven was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its command, replaced by something more tired, more honest. "Those 3 packs attacked my territory first," he said. "I did not choose that war. I ended it as quickly as I could, because every day it continued. More of my people died defending land that was rightfully theirs. I never told anyone how young I was when it happened, or how much I hated every decision I had to make. It was easier to let the stories grow colder than the truth, because a king who is feared does not need to explain himself to anyone." Lyra studied his face as he spoke, searching for the cruelty the stories had promised her. She found only exhaustion, and beneath it, a loneliness that mirrored her own. "I searched for you because the alliance mattered," he continued. "But somewhere in those months, I stopped caring about the alliance at all. I searched because the bond between us went silent the night you disappeared, and I could not explain to anyone, not even myself, how much that silence hurt. I told my advisors I wanted you found for the sake of the kingdom. The truth is simpler than that. I wanted you found because some nights I swore I could still smell rain on cedar wood drifting through my own halls, and I thought I was losing my mind." Lyra's breath caught. She remembered those same nights, lying awake in the servants' quarters, wondering if the king she had run from could possibly feel anything at all. "I was here the whole time," she admitted quietly, "scrubbing your floors, serving your meals. I told myself it was the safest place to hide, because no one imagines that the missing bride would choose to disappear inside the very castle she ran from. For the first time since she had entered the room, something shifted in Draven's expression, and the corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but close enough to soften the sharp lines of his face. 8 months, he said. 8 months, and you were closer to me than anyone else in this kingdom. Neither of them moved to close the remaining distance between them. There was too much history, too much fear built over months and years, for a single conversation to erase it all. But something had changed in the room, some old wall beginning, slowly, to crack. They talked through the rest of the morning, long after the tray of food had gone cold on the desk. Lyra spoke of her childhood, of the fear bred into her by elders who wanted obedient pups more than honest ones. Draven spoke of the isolation of leadership, of how quickly a king learns that showing weakness invites attack, until eventually there is no one left to show anything to at all. Neither of them apologized for everything. Neither of them forgave everything either. But by the time the sun had climbed high over the castle walls, something new had settled between them, something built not on rumor or duty, but on two people finally speaking honestly to each other for the first time. "I am not asking you to become my queen today," Draven said finally, as the light outside began to shift toward afternoon. "I am only asking you to stop hiding. Whatever happens next, let it happen because you chose it, not because you were promised into it before you ever had the chance to choose." Lyra reached up and pulled the grey servant's cap from her head, letting her short hair fall free for the first time in front of him. It felt strange, almost like stepping out of a costume she had worn so long it had become a second skin. "I would like that," she said. "I would like the chance to choose." Word spread through the castle by evening, though no one could quite agree on how. By the time the sun set behind the western hills, the kitchens, the guard towers, and the great hall all buzzed with the same impossible news. The missing bride had been found, not in some distant territory, but within the walls of Veyrath itself, and the Alpha King had not punished her disappearance. He had welcomed her return. In the days that followed, Lyra stepped back into her true name, slowly, carefully, the way someone tests weight on a leg that has been injured too long to trust fully. Draven did not rush her. He did not demand the ceremony that had once been forced upon them both. Instead, he gave her time and space and the quiet certainty that whatever came next would come only when she was ready for it. When the day finally arrived that Lyra chose, freely and without fear, to stand beside him as his mate, the entire kingdom gathered to witness it. It was not the tense, hurried ceremony that had once sent a terrified girl fleeing into the night. It was slower, warmer, filled with the kind of quiet joy that comes only after two people have found their way to each other honestly, on their own terms. Standing before her people for the first time not as a runaway, and not as a stranger, but as herself, Lyra understood at last what the old stories had never told her. The bond had chosen well from the very beginning. It had simply taken both of them time, and courage, and one ordinary breakfast tray, to find their way back to it.